On the morning of March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa Bole International Airport at 8:38 a.m. local time. The weather was clear, the aircraft was brand new, delivered to Ethiopian Airlines just 2 months earlier. The captain was 29 years of age and one of the airline's most promising pilots. The first officer was 25. 6 minutes and 2 seconds after takeoff, the aircraft struck the ground at nearly 700 miles per hour. There were no survivors. The wreckage was buried more than 30 feet into a wheat field near the town of Bishoftu. 157 people from 35 countries were on board. UN staff, aid workers, a family of 4 from Canada, a father and his teenage daughter from Kenya, people traveling for work, for family, for hope. It was the second time in 5 months that a brand new Boeing 737 MAX 8 had fallen out of the sky under almost identical circumstances. The first time, 189 people died off the coast of Indonesia. Nobody had grounded the aircraft, nobody had fixed the problem, and 157 more people paid for that decision with their lives. This is not just the story of a crash, it is the story of a software system called MCAS. A system that pilots don't know existed, regulators didn't properly scrutinize, that Boeing's own engineers raised concerns about, and that killed 346 people across 2 accidents before the world finally said enough. Welcome back. For those of you who are new here, my name is Sammy. I'm a commercial qualified pilot looking for my first flying job, as well as training to become a flight instructor. And on this channel, we are looking at an aviation accident to understand what went wrong, but most importantly, what can we learn from it? To understand Flight 302, you have to go back to a business decision made in 2011. That year, American Airlines, one of Boeing's largest customers, announced it was purchasing 460 Airbus aircraft, A320neo. This was a new, fuel-efficient, narrow-body jet. It was cheaper to operate than the aging Boeing 737, and whilst Boeing was losing market share. Therefore, Boeing had 2 options. One, to either build an entirely new aircraft, a clean sheet design that would take another 8 to 10 years and cost in the billions, or update the existing 737 to match Airbus's fuel-efficient aircraft, get it certified as a variant of an existing type, and get it into service fast. They chose the second option. The result was the 737 MAX. 346 total deaths, 2 accidents, 20 months the MAX flew before grounding, 387 days the global fleet was grounded, 800 plus MAX aircraft in service when grounded. The new fuel-efficient LEAP engines that Boeing wanted to put on the MAX were larger and more powerful than the old 737 engines. To fit them, Boeing had to mount them further forward and higher on the wing. This changed the aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. Most significantly, it made the nose pitch upward at high angles of attack, creating a tendency towards an aerodynamic stall. This was a problem, a significant redesign to the airframe that would have required recertifying the aircraft as a new type, which would have required airlines to put pilots through a full simulator training on the new type rating, costing time and money. Boeing had contractually promised American Airlines that the MAX would be certifiable as a variant of the existing 737, requiring only minimal additional pilot training, no new type rating, no full simulator requirement. Boeing's solution was MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, a software system invisible to pilots, not disclosed in the flight manual, but designed to automatically push the nose down if sensors detected a high angle of attack. It would compensate for the engine placement issue quietly in the background, without pilots needing to know even existed. The logic was simple. If the aircraft handles like a standard 737, pilots don't need new training. If pilots don't need new training, the aircraft can be certified as a 737 variant. If it's Certified as a variant, Boeing doesn't have to pay American Airlines the penalty clause for missing the new type rating promise. The financial stakes ran to billions of dollars. Before we get to Ethiopian 302, we have to spend time on Lion Air Flight 610 because the two accidents are not merely similar. They are the same accident caused by the same system failure happening to different crews who had been given meaningful way to prevent it. On October 29, 2018, 4 months and 10 days before Ethiopian 302 flight, Lion Air Flight 610 departed Jakarta, Indonesia at 6:20 in the morning. On board 189 people. The aircraft was also a brand new 737 MAX 8. Shortly after takeoff, the MCAS system activated. It had received a faulty reading from a single angle of attack sensor. One of two sensors on the aircraft telling it the nose was pitching dangerously high. MCAS responded by commanding the horizontal stabilizer push the nose down. The pilots pulled back on the controls to counter it. MCAS activated it again and again. MCAS was designed to activate in single limited pulses, but in practice, if the triggering condition persisted, even a false one could reactivate repeatedly. Each activation moved the stabilizer further. The pilots were fighting a system they didn't know existed, with no procedure to defeat it in an aircraft that was less than 3 months old. Lion Air 610 entered the Java Sea 13 minutes after takeoff at approximately 450 knots. There were no survivors. After Lion Air 610, Boeing issued a bulletin to airlines reminding crews of the existing runway stabilizer procedure. This procedure was not labeled as MCAS related because airlines had never been told MCAS existed. The FAA did not ground the fleet. However, Boeing did not disclose the full picture of MCAS to pilots or regulators. The 737 MAX continued flying. In the 5 months between Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian 302 flight, 346 more people would board 737 MAX aircraft. Some of them would have read about the Lion Air crash. None of them knew what had caused it. Boeing and the FAA knew. They said nothing actionable. Departure from Addis Ababa, runway 07, is a normal takeoff. Captain Yared Getachew, 29, is pilot flying, and First Officer Ahmed Nur Mohammed, 25, is pilot monitoring. Conditions are clear. Left angle of attack sensor malfunction immediately. At the moment of rotation, the left angle of attack sensor begins reading erroneously, showing 74.5 degrees nose up when the aircraft is climbing normally at approximately 15 degrees. The stick shaker activates on the captain's side. It will not stop for the remainder of the flight. MCAS first activation, nose push down. MCAS receives the false angle of attack reading and commands the stabilizer nose down. The crew counters with electric trim. The aircraft climbs through 1,000 feet, but the stick shaker continues. A relentless, disorientating warning that something is badly wrong. The crew cuts out electric stabilizer trim. Correct procedure following the runway stabilizer checklist. The crew cuts out the electric trim stabilizer switches. MCAS is now disabled, but the stabilizer is in a significantly nose-down position from the previous MCAS activations, and the aircraft is accelerating. Manual trim becomes impossible. At high speeds, the aerodynamic forces on the stabilizer make manual trim wheel operation extremely difficult, potentially requiring forces exceeding 100 pounds. The crew attempts to use manual trim. The aircraft is now above 340 knots, accelerating with the nose being pushed down. Crew re-engages electric trim. Fateful decision. Unable to manually trim the aircraft. The crew re-enables the electric stabilizer trim switches. This immediately reactivates MCAS. The system commands a further nose-down input of 2.5 units in approximately 5 seconds. Impact at 700 miles per hour, 40 degrees nose down. Aircraft strikes terrain at approximately 700 miles per hour in a near vertical dive. Their wreckage is buried 30 feet into the ground. All 157 aboard die instantly. There are no survivors and no intact remains. So what did the crew know and didn't know? The Ethiopian Accident Investigation Bureau recovered both their CVR and their FDR, voice recorder and flight data recorder. What they revealed was deeply significant, not just for understanding this crash, but for understanding exactly what Boeing had withheld from the people flying this aircraft. Stick shaker activates at rotation. It continues without stopping for the remainder of the flight. 5 minutes 28 seconds of continuous alarm. The captain tries to trim. Aircraft nosing down against pilot input. Captain fighting against the controls. The first officer, stab trim, cut out confirmed. Runway stabilizer procedure executed. MCAS disabled, but stabilizer already significantly nose down. The captain trying to manually trim, saying, "Help me, manual trim." At 340 knots, the aerodynamic load makes it effectively immovable. ATC asking confirm altitude. First officer, flight control problem. Request back to the field. The ATC clears them to return to Addis Ababa. They will never make it. The captain engages trim. Engage. I'll hold. Decision to re-enable electric trim. The only option remaining to them, and that's when MCAS reactivates immediately. MCAS commands 2.5 units nose down in 5 seconds. The aircraft enters an recoverable dive. Final altitude 8,400 feet with speed at 458 knots and increasing. Here is what I need you to understand about that re-engagement decision. Captain Garachu and First Officer Muhammad were not making an error in the conventional sense. They were trapped in a situation no training had prepared them for, because Boeing had ensured no training covered it. They knew the runway stabilizer procedure. They executed correctly, but the procedure assumed that after cutting out the electric trim, manual trim would be physically possible at the speed the aircraft had reached. Speed that itself was partly a result of MCAS having pushed the nose down. The aerodynamic forces on the stabilizer made manual trim effectively impossible without two pilots putting their full strength on the wheel simultaneously in the right sequence. They were given a broken aircraft, a procedure designed for a different failure mode. 6 minutes of total flight time, and a stick shaker screaming in their ears from the moment the wheels left the ground. They did everything in the manual. The manual just wasn't complete. The two accidents compared the same failure twice. One of the most daunting aspects of this story is the near perfect parallel between the Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian 302. Let me put them side by side. Lion Air 610 on October 29th, 2018. Where left angle of attack sensor fails at rotation. Stick shaker activates and stays on. MCAS activates repeatedly, nose down, pitch attitude. Crew counters with trim for about 10 minutes. The aircraft enters the Java Sea at 450 knots, leading to 189 fatalities with no survivors, compared to Ethiopian 302, March 10, 2019. Left angle of attack sensor fails at rotation. Stick shaker activates and stays on. MCAS activates repeatedly with nose down attitude. The crew execute stab trim cut out correctly. Aircraft impacts terrain at more than 700 miles per hour, leading to 157 fatalities with no survivors. The Ethiopian crew had one advantage the Lion Air crew did not. They heard about the Lion Air 610 and had received Boeing's post-crash bulletin about the runway stabilizer procedure. They followed it. However, it wasn't enough, because the bulletin, as Boeing had issued it, did not fully describe the physical difficulty of manual trimming at high speed and did not mention MCAS. Boeing knew what had caused Lion Air 610. The FAA knew what had caused Lion Air 610. Neither took action sufficient to prevent Ethiopian 302. What the investigations found: the Ethiopian Accident Investigation Bureau the US NTSB, and eventually a US House of Representatives subcommittee all investigated the crashes and their systemic causes. The findings were extraordinary in their scope and severity. MCAS was designed to rely on a single sensor, unlike almost every other flight system on a modern commercial aircraft. MCAS received input from only one angle of attack sensor, not both. If that sensor failed, MCAS would act on a false data. There was no cross-check. This was a known design choice, and it was approved. Pilots were not told MCAS existed. The original 737 MAX Flight Crew Operations Manual, the document pilot used to understand their aircraft, did not mention MCAS. Pilots flying the MAX had no knowledge of a system that could override their control inputs and repeatedly push the nose of their aircraft towards the ground. Boeing's position was that pilots would not need to know because MCAS was designed to be transparent. MCAS authority was significantly expanded during development without full review in early versions of MCAS. The system could move the stabilizer by 0.6 degrees. By the time of certification, that authority had been expanded to 2.5 degrees, a four-fold increase, to address the aerodynamic issue more forcefully. This change was not subjected to the full safety analysis review that the original lesser system had received. Certification documents reflected the original smaller value. Boeing's safety analysis contained critical errors. The original MCAS hazard assessment incorrectly assumed that pilots would recognize and respond to an MCAS runway within 3 seconds. Industry data on human response times to unexpected automation failure suggested this was wildly optimistic. The assessment also failed to account for the MCAS reactivating after pilot correction inputs. FAA oversight was compromised by delegation and pressure. A US House of Representatives investigation found that the FAA had delegated significant portions of the MAX certification process to Boeing's own engineers, a practice known as Organization Designation Authorization. Boeing employees acting as FAA designees faced internal pressure around scheduling and cost. The investigation found that FAA management had, in some instances, overruled the safety concerns of their own technical staff. Grounding was delayed after Lion Air 610 aviation authorities in China, the EU, Canada, and others grounded the 737 MAX within days of Ethiopian 302. The FAA, the aircraft's certifying authority, was among the last to act, grounding the type on March 13, 2019, 3 days after Ethiopian 302, and only after President Trump personally called Boeing's CEO. The delay has been the subject of sustained and serious criticism. In January 2021, Boeing entered into a deferred prosecution agreement with the US Department of Justice, agreeing to pay $2.5 billion to resolve criminal charges of conspiracy to defraud the FAA. The company admitted that 2 Boeing employees had deceived the FAA during the certification process. The individual Boeing executives faced criminal prosecution at the time. In 2024, the DOJ moved to pursue further criminal charges against Boeing, finding the company had violated the terms of the 2021 agreement. Boeing agreed to plead guilty to a single felony fraud charge. The family of those who died in both crashes protested the terms as inadequate, arguing that no individual decision maker had been held personally accountable for 346 deaths. Several senior Boeing engineers and managers involved in the MAX program have spoken publicly since the crashes, some as whistleblowers, some before Congress, some in interviews. A common thread runs through their accounts. A culture at Boeing that had over the preceding 2 decades shifted from engineering first to finance first. The people who built aircraft were no longer the people making the key decisions about them. Ed Pearson, a former Boeing senior manager, testified before Congress that he had raised safety concerns about the MAX production line. Under pressure, moving too fast, and been told to keep the line moving. He sent an email to his superiors in June 2018, 4 months before Lion Air 610, saying he was scared and that he would not put his family on a MAX. Nobody stopped the line. Mark Faulkner, the Boeing test pilot, who was the primary contact with the FAA during MAX certification, was charged with fraud in 2021 for allegedly providing the FAA with incomplete information about MCAS. He was acquitted by a jury in 2022. His acquittal was interpreted by some observers as reflecting the difficulty of assigning individual criminal responsibility for what was, in a sense, systemic institutional failure. The 737 MAX flies again. And what changed? The 737 MAX was grounded globally on March 13, 2019. It remained grounded for 20 months, the longest grounding of a commercial aircraft type in aviation history. It returned to service in the United States in November 2020 and in most other jurisdictions through 2021. The changes Boeing made to return the MAX to service was significant. MCAS was redesigned to use inputs from both angle of attack sensors, cross-checking them against each other. If the sensors disagree by more than a threshold value, MCAS will not activate. The maximum stabilizer movement MCAS can command was reduced. Pilots received genuine training on MCAS, including simulated time for the first time. The system is now documented in the flight manual. The FAA underwent internal reform, introducing new oversight requirements for aircraft certification and reducing the delegation of certification authority to manufacturers. Whether these reforms are sufficient remains a subject of active debate among aviation safety experts. The 737 MAX flying today is a meaningfully different aircraft from the one that killed 346 people. Whether it should ever have been certified in its original form is a totally different question. One that the aviation industry, regulators, and the families of the dead have not finished asking. So what have these crashes changed? What have they not? The legacy of the 737 MAX crashes is still being written. In the immediate sense, the changes to MCAS and the new training requirements made the aircraft safer. But the deeper questions in terms of how aviation certification works, about the relationship between manufacturers and regulators, about what happens when commercial pressure and engineering safety pull in opposite directions, those questions remain unresolved. The crashes accelerated a global conversation about the FAA's delegation model, the practice of allowing manufacturers to self-certify significant portions of their own aircraft's safety analysis. The US House Subcommittee report, published in September 2020, used unusually blunt language. It described the MAX crashes as the horrific culmination of a series of faulty technical assumptions by Boeing's engineers, a lack of transparency on the part of Boeing's management, and a grossly insufficient oversight by the FAA. For the families of those who died in both crashes, the question of legacy is more personal. Many have continued to advocate in courts, before Congress, in the press, for genuine accountability. Some have explicitly rejected the financial settlements as inadequate substitutes for justice. A number have established foundations in the names of those they lost. Yared Getachew, the 29-year-old captain of Ethiopian 302, was described by Ethiopian Airlines as one of its most capable young pilots. He had nearly 9,000 flight hours. He had done nothing wrong. The aircraft he was flying had a hidden system that was broken from the moment it was designed, certified by a process that had been compromised by the pressures of commercial competition. and put into service on an assurance that pilots would never need to know it existed. 346 people died because a company decided that speed and cost mattered more than transparency. That is not a technical finding, it is a moral one. And aviation, which has spent 70 years building a safety culture on the principle that transparency is non-negotiable, has to decide what to do with that. 6 minutes and 2 seconds. 157 people from 35 countries. A 29-year-old captain who did everything right. A system he was never told that existed. 346 deaths that connect 2 aircraft, 2 oceans, 2 crews, and 1 decision made in a boardroom in Chicago about how to compete with Airbus. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 is not primarily a story about pilot error. It is not primarily a story about a faulty sensor. It is a story about what happens to safety culture when it is subordinated to commercial culture. When the people who build aircraft stop being the people who decide what is acceptable risk. Aviation's safety record is the greatest achievement in the history of transport engineering. It was built on a foundational principle that when something goes wrong, you find out why. You tell everyone and you fix it. The 737 MAX story is a case study in what happens when that principle is quietly set aside. The families of those who died on Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian 302 deserve better than a deferred prosecution agreement and a redesigned sensor. Whether they will get it is still in 2025, 2026, an open question. If you want to go deep on this, the US House Subcommittee report is publicly available and essential. Peter Robinson's book covers the full institutional story in detail, and the EAIB final report on the Ethiopian 302 is on their website. All links in the description. Like always, follow me for more air accident investigations. Like the video if you found it was useful. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe if you haven't. And as always, blue skies, summits fly.